there have been changes now that I didn't think the union would be in favor of. But I think when you put it in terms of like, hey, this is life or death, and we all need to be on the same page with that. Like if if you're not capable of performing the same amount of work that I am, then I've got to do your work for you on the fire ground. So I think everybody's pretty on board with it, and the union itself is supportive.
Welcome back, team, to another week with Drew and Alex on Mops and Mo's. We have a guest this time. I think last week, the weeks are all discombobulated.
We had a guest last time too.
Do we have a guest? Okay. But before we kick things off, summer 2024, Alex has decided to learn how to swim.
This is long overdue. First of all, not learn how to swim. I can swim. We
Swim
can go
forward.
back to
You're trying to swim forward.
we can go back to the Master of the Sword episode. I think I got like a B plus in combat survival swimming, whatever that course is called. Did okay. Got a B of some kind. I know it wasn't an A.
Is that like a time? How do you get a grade in? Is that like a time based?
There's a bunch of like timed lap swimming you have to do, which is where I lost all my points. And then there's a bunch of like survival gates you'd have to do, which is mostly like treading water in a uniform, swimming around in a uniform with a rifle, staying underwater and doing some stuff. And I did good at all that because I can do like gimmicky swimming, like nonsense underwater, bob and travel, whatever.
Gimmicky swimming, combat swimming. Yeah.
It's just the part where you have to like be good at actual swimming that I suck at. And
Like
I want to
moving
get good
through the
enough.
water.
I want to get good enough to use swimming as like a real cardio modality for myself and I build up a lot of volume from it.
Yep.
And right now I'm not quite like I'm getting there. I can do some like okay freestyle after a lesson and stuff. Just want to get better. My explanation for this has been the same as the explanation for a lot of my physical pursuits. I'm pretty fit, but I'm not athletic. And what that means is, in my definition of the term, once you have to do more than two things at the same time, I start to fall apart.
Kick and stroke.
So, like, we'll use the swimming example, right? In breaststroke, you only have to do one thing at a time. Pull, breathe, kick, glide. And you just do those things over and over again. So breaststroke's not that bad. Freestyle, you got to do the arm thing, you got to do the leg thing, and you got to breathe. And for me, one of those things has got to give. And usually what happens is I do the arm thing really great and I do the leg thing really great and the breathing falls apart. Yeah. So I'm trying to fix that. We're working on some drills, some like side strokey rollover stuff to like make it a slower process and I get the breathings consistently. We're working on it. We're trying to get there.
I wish people could watch you do this like air swim.
Yeah, people who are listening at home are not seeing me act out all of this.
So full disclosure, we talked about this before recording, but we'll do a swim episode. I think it's especially in the tactical space. I mean, I guess outside of the Navy, like nobody swims, which is a real shame. It's a great skill. So we'll do a full episode. I will tell you, don't kick.
Don't kick?
No, I remember. So when I trained as a lifeguard in high school, we had to do like a 300-meter thing, and I almost blacked out. And once I started learning total immersion swimming, which is like an actual technique, people can Google it. I'll go for funsies to the pool now and swim like a mile and a half, and then get out and just go home. Totally like hardly. I kick probably in a 25-meter length. I kick probably 3 times.
Interesting.
And I
don't your legs start to like sink if you don't kick?
Not if you look that like this is becoming lengthy, but it's buoyancy. So you sort of,
yeah, no, you got to look more down.
Yep, look down.
I got that.
Your hips come up, and the stroke becomes more of a like a DNA spiral thing. So you're spiraling through the water, and the other thing that helped a lot was exhaling underwater, which I wasn't doing. I was coming out of the water, exhaling and trying to inhale. Once I figured those 2 things out, dude, like game changer. And I've done that with enough guys now who have done various assessments and training to where I know like it works. So anyway, we'll do a full episode on that. This is getting
before
lengthy.
we go, I want to say I've been thinking about working on my swimming for a long time, and I've avoided it because I hate doing things I suck at in public. But the thing that really tipped me over the edge of like I got to work on this because like I like snorkeling, and you don't have to worry about breathing when you're snorkeling. Like I love doing all that stuff. I'm not like afraid to go swim in the ocean or anything like that. But we were in Hawaii a few weeks ago, and this dude, I would guess he was like 65-ish, somewhere in that range, just like casually like walks up towards the water on the beach, wearing his like Speedo and carrying his goggles or whatever. And it's choppy enough that like a lot of people aren't going in the water. Like waves are decently big. And this guy just like wanders out, gets like 30 feet out into the ocean. And just like while we're walking along the beach, this guy swims like a mile down the beach. Once he gets down to like the Black Rock area down there, he like comes out of the water and like stands around looking around, like not super tired or anything. Like, he's chilling, enjoys the view, and then wanders back into the water and swims like a mile back. And I
The
was like,
second
damn.
part's impressive because he's either swimming with the tide at the beginning or like
One way
ocean swimming
wasn't
is
in
easy
one
one
out.
way and shitty the other
Yeah.
way. You're also floating
Yeah.
a little bit more in the ocean,
You
but
do, you're more buoyant and stuff for
yeah.
sure. But this guy made it look super casual. He wasn't even like working hard while he was out there. It was like a very fluid, relaxed stroke. And I was like, I just want to be able to do that.
You know, speaking of guys that make hard things look really easy, smooth and casual, who are we talking to this
Look
week?
at that
That was
transition.
beautiful. This was also dangerously close to becoming a swim episode
That's true. All
on
right, we'll
its
get back
own.
on track. Fun fact, we didn't really discuss this at all in the podcast. His athletic career started as a high school swimmer.
Look at that. Guys,
We have Matt Chan on the podcast. After high school swimming, he went on to play collegiate water polo at Western Illinois
that's a
University.
sport. That's a hell of
It,
a sport.
it's like lays serious claim. Like if you've seen what happens underwater in water polo, those are athletes.
Yeah. Anyway.
But that's not what we're here to talk about. It just happens to work really well with the transition. In his late 20s, Matt was a North Metro firefighter in Denver, Colorado, and took up CrossFit as a way to improve his endurance for the job. And despite his age, which is not late at that point, but it's kind of late to be a pro athlete, he made his CrossFit Games debut at the age of 30. And despite being older than a lot of the other competitors there, he went on to 4 top 10 finishes at the CrossFit Games, including second place in 2012. Across that journey, he ended up becoming a full-time professional athlete and one of the most popular and knowledgeable veterans in the sport. Now that phase is over. He's no longer a full-time pro athlete. He is back to firefighting, still in the Denver area. And in addition, he coaches at Train for the Win, also known as TrainFTW. He spent extensive time on the CrossFit Seminar Staff, and as you'll hear in this episode, also has a role as a peer fitness trainer in his fire department. And has some fun extra stuff. He was the Titan Games Season 2 champion at 42 years old, and he enjoys rock climbing, mountain biking, and hunting.
I think if people know who Matt Chan is before listening to this episode, they don't need much of an introduction. He's like OG CrossFit, right in that sweet spot with Rich Froning and Jason Khalipa and those guys. So if you know him, you know him. If you don't, I would encourage folks to like just type his name into Google. You'll get plenty of good stuff. He did a lot of work on the seminar staff for the, I guess, level 1, possibly 2, and level 3
He was also on
curriculum.
2 at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk a little bit about that. But one of the reasons why, I mean, I've been following his programming for a little bit, and it's really sound programming, but I wanted to try and get him on because, as you mentioned, here's a guy who has been training at a really high level for a really long time. And if you look at the kind of arc of that training as he's gotten older, it's become more of a longevity play. But then at the same time, it's less about how fast can you do a workout and more about how robust can you be to do the other things, like you mentioned, the mountain biking and the firefighting and the super long range hunting stuff that he does. So a very interesting conversation. And I think hopefully for folks that really, really hang their hats on CrossFit, especially like OG CrossFit, hopefully there's some insightful takeaways here. He certainly doesn't bash CrossFit. He loves CrossFit, but I think that his philosophies have changed slightly, maybe it's safe to say, over time.
Definitely evolved in a direction of more aerobic training. And we will talk about that plenty in the episode.
Yep. So again, give this guy a Google if you don't know who he is. If you do know who he is, enjoy. I was laughing because you said 40 minutes on Murph, and I know a ton of people I know just did Murph a couple weeks ago, and it was like an hour plus for most of these people.
Yeah, well, right, of course, yeah. But you know, to me, like, I feel like CrossFit has such a gravitational pull because you know it's effective. right? You see plenty of people around the world carrying more muscle mass than they have ever seen people carrying by doing, 3 to 5 minute workouts. And it doesn't involve specifically targeting aesthetics, which I think people buy into that as well. They like the idea that, functional movements produce results physically. But yeah, in reality, I think CrossFit is also entertaining. That's kind of where I was going with this, is that people need to be entertained by a workout program nowadays. And if you don't believe me, just look at the Peloton, right? It's like they can't do it without looking at somebody that's coaching them, or that's, attractive group, leading a group. And they need to be able to look at something, look at their phone. And if you're going to go out there and throw down, you know, grace, you're going to want to do it with a group of people, um, that, you get to like hang out with afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and, have some entertainment value. Um, like I was saying though, like, if you're running, if your plan is to run 100 mile, you know, ultra, that's CrossFit's not going to get you there. And those big audacious goals, like that, they're associated with boring, really boring training programs. And that's the antithesis of CrossFit, right? It's the opposite. It's not, it's every day is different. You're always entertained. You're always, guessing what the next workout's going to be and how you're going to feel afterwards, as opposed to I'm going to do the same thing every day with very minute changes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we hit record, you used Murph as an example, and I think about this a lot because Murph is super popular in the military. Everybody does it Memorial Day and things like that. But I'm I'm less impressed by people who like struggle through an awful hour 20-minute Murph, but like gave it 100% in that process. And I'm more impressed by the unsexy process of doing the boring training for the couple months prior to Murph to make it
Me
not so
too.
awful. But nobody ever like highlights that, and that doesn't get shown on social media and stuff like that. It's never hyped up to do the boring part of the process, because Murph should be
Right.
just a workout you do and then you continue on. But so many people are wrecked for like 3 days afterwards because they did the exciting part without the boring preparation.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was speaking to. It's just like, most of these workouts you can jump in and play with minimal barriers to entry, right? There's skill, there's stuff like that that has to be built up over time. Like if you're going to do squat snatches in a workout, you can't really do that on day one. But, something like Murph, where it's push, pull, squat and running, yeah, anybody can jump in and enjoy that thing, and with no preparation time, get a great workout.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I personally value training that's a little bit more, as you guys know, like that's a little bit more targeted, towards a goal, because that's what, for me, keeps people coming back, including myself, is if I'm training for something for a period of time, and I go out and I achieve a goal that it took me, 6 to 8 weeks, or maybe even, like the Leadville 100 that I'm doing this summer, uh, took me 8 months to prepare for. There's a bigger payoff at the end than if I didn't prepare at all.
I'm curious about, okay, so as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, again, sort of CrossFit, but specifically competitive CrossFit, and maybe even, I don't know, you could call it just broadly CrossFit over the last decade or so. But around the time when you were sort of at the height of what I would say would be kind of your competitive career, was that a time where people like, because as I remember it, it seemed as though the sport of CrossFit was kind of growing into itself, evolving. Things were, I don't want to say it was very experimental, but like for you having a goal to compete at that level and do that thing, I mean, what did training look like for you? Because we always hear people, oh, like professional CrossFitters aren't doing CrossFit, they're doing something very different, and then they compete in CrossFit. Like in its nascent stages, like what did that look like for you?
Uh, no, I would say that people that say that are underinformed. Um, it doesn't look like the variance part of CrossFit,
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
what people are doing now, because that's the shortcoming of seeing a singular goal, right? You're never gonna see like a beginner is always going to look like a beginner, and they're going to experience results and PRs like a beginner. They're always going to PR, and that's great. That's the one of the cool things about CrossFit is like you have such limited exposure to specific movements or rep ranges or whatever. You're always going to improve. You're always going to get PR unless you've taken long periods off. Whereas when you have an expert like what, a CrossFit Games athlete is, they're going to experience change in small percentages. They could work on their back squat for a period of 8 weeks and see a 1.5% increase in their back squat. That would be a huge improvement. That'd be like, somebody's got a 400-pound back squat. That's 4 pounds. That sounds like nothing to you and I, but when you have maximized what you can do at a certain body weight, that's it. That's a PR. That's that 4 pounds. No, it's not 40 pounds. It's 4 pounds, and you're gonna be happy with it. So I'd say what competitive CrossFit Games athletes are doing now is basically they have to manage the stimulus that they're providing to their body to match what they're actually in need of, but while maintaining the conditioning side of things. So yes, they do CrossFit for sure. They do, what we would call mixed modality, high intensity training. But they also have regular exposure to running, to weightlifting, cycles, to specific gymnastics work, so all of that stuff, you're not going to get better unless you practice it or whether you train with it. So that's where there's a big difference. When we talk about just like people that are going to the affiliate, yeah, it doesn't look like that. So those are the side dishes for CrossFit Games athletes.
So I think we're actually going to move most of this conversation away from competitive CrossFit. But what you were just saying there brings up a question for me that I wanted to ask while we had you. You were second place in the 2012 CrossFit Games, right?
Yeah.
So I watched a 2012 video of you talking about your training, and there was a lot of discussion of nutrition and things like that. But you mentioned in the video that you were only training like an hour and a half a day, and it was like still feasible for you to like take a day or two off, go skiing, things like that. In the environment of today's CrossFit Games, is that approach to training still possible for them, or have things changed so much in the sport that it's become like a managing massive training volumes kind of game?
Yeah, definitely that. But there's a couple things that need to be said there. Like in 2012, I think I was 36 years old. I was older than the majority of the field, with the exception, I think, of Chris Spieler and Neil Maddox. Like the three of us were like similar age group, and training volume was never my thing because of that. I couldn't manage it without getting hurt and being under recovered. But when I was late 20s, it wasn't a big deal. Like I could ski all day and hit a strength workout in the morning, ski all day, and then hit conditioning in the evening. It didn't affect me like it did later on. So I think today's CrossFit Games athletes, what you're going to see is that there are very few 35-year-olds, if any, especially in the men's field. So training volume is possible, because, just they have all their juices flowing that, an older person might not. So I think that's the big difference. But yeah, these guys nowadays, you're not going to see people just in the gym for an hour and a half a day. It's just not like
Could
that.
you beat him in a fight though?
Did you say, could I fight
Yeah,
them?
could you beat him in a fight? I feel like you could win in a fight.
Yeah, I would hope so. I fight dirty,
Yeah,
so
see,
probably.
exactly. I want to know. So, obviously, tactical population lumped into that oftentimes is firefighting, law enforcement, paramedic in some sense, but it's sort of all the same thing. I'm curious about you as a firefighter. using CrossFit, and I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing is kind of like your main way of training for that job, which I think is what a lot of soldiers, and I'll go so far as to say like special operations types, I've had that argument made of like, I'll do this sort of training and that'll be good enough for me to do my job, whatever it might be. Did
Yeah.
you find as a firefighter kind of coming into CrossFit, did you find like where was that really beneficial for you? And I guess as a follow-on question, were there gaps in your job that you found you had to plug with something else? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that, well, first of all, I was introduced to CrossFit because of firefighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had a difficult time initially with wearing all the gear and managing my heart rate and respiratory rate. It's carrying out around a water can with some tools, making entry on a house, like in training and stuff like that, and control, or carrying a hose line and doing work with an elevated heart rate. I had a difficult time with that. So I started training with CrossFit and that stuff got better. So to answer your question, yes, that part of it's really good. The the thing that I think CrossFit misses out on and misses the mark entirely on is aerobic training. And that's such an essential part of fitness that um, it gets overlooked and taken for granted that if I have anaerobic capacity, then I'm going to have aerobic capacity. And it's actually the opposite of that. You're going to have a deficiency as you develop, you're going to have an aerobic deficiency as you develop an anaerobic efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the thing that, if you go into a CrossFit program knowing that you still need to maintain your aerobic sufficiency, it could be a very good program. But, I would put the number as high as 80% of your training should be aerobic. So very, very, very much unlike a CrossFit workout, CrossFit program.
I'm so glad you said that because one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I could be off the mark here, so feel free to tell me I'm off the mark, but it seems as though I have seen a lot of guys in your demographic kind of transition their training to a more aerobic version of CrossFit. I mean, you're a big hunter, mountain biker. I know a lot of other guys. I mean, Chris Spieler comes to mind with kind of what he's doing. But I've seen this pop up quite a bit with a population that has transitioned away from the high intensity, competitive, yada, 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 to more of a what training can I do in the gym to support my lifestyle, which in a lot of cases is more aerobic, more outdoorsy. And I think for the population we speak to, they're finding that an aerobic base is incredibly important for both their job and
Yeah.
also their lifestyle. So I guess my
Yeah.
question there is like, what has that transition, if you even want to call it a transition, but what has that looked like for you and how's that changed your training methodology?
Yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Definitely, like, I have switched to a more aerobic program because it does support the activities that I want to do. It does benefit me on the fire ground when we have to work for long periods of time. And also it has taught me how to suffer better. And I think that is, as far as the military and the fire ground, the firefighting stuff is concerned, is just as much of a skill as performing a squat snatch. When you know how to suffer for long periods of time, and keep your head down and keep just grunting along, that's a skill, and it takes years and years and years and years to develop it. And frankly, uh, soldiers seem to be better at it. Um, the people that I work with that have made the transition from military to firefighting generally are better at that than the people that have no military experience. And I'm guessing, I have no military background, but it's, everything that you guys do in boot camp and then the slogs that occur afterwards on a daily basis, just getting your ass beat, carrying lots of gear around all day, every day. Um, that suffering part of it, I think you get to experience that longer in aerobic efforts And I think that's an important part of that. But yeah, you said it. It's, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more satisfaction out of training for events. And that event might be something like a September mule deer archery hunt, or it might be, an actual race of some sort, like a mountain bike race. But most of those things are not short, high intensity efforts, right?
Mhm.
In real life, there's not really too many things that I would want to train for that are short, high intensity efforts. I could think of like I'm interested in jujitsu. To me, that would be a short, high intensity effort. Um, I would say that, obviously, the tactical games
Mhm.
is something I'm interested in right now, and those are short, high intensity efforts. Um, but for the most part, everything else, whether it's, doing something outdoors in the mountains, or whether it's, mountain biking, running, something like that, like all that stuff it's aerobic based stuff. And frankly, my body feels so much better because of that stuff, rather than just doing more back squats and deadlifts and just beating myself up more.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I have a question at the end of this, but just an observation of like a trend I've definitely seen in the military, and I'm sure it exists beyond the military. But historically, the approach to fitness has been a lot of push-ups, sit-ups, and running, certainly putting on a backpack and rucking for a while and things like that. So you had a lot of people that, whether they knew they were doing it or not, were building a really solid aerobic base. And then you have a bunch of
Yeah.
research come out about injury rates due to running, and that being like the single biggest contributor to lost duty days in the military. And so people start to get worried about running, and they try out something like CrossFit where it's short, high intensity. And when you layer that high intensity on top of the great aerobic base they've built, you see some awesome results. But then they
Yes.
they discount all the work they put in before layering on that high intensity and start advising other people away from the aerobic base stuff and just to the high intensity. And those people don't get the same big picture result they got. I think there's a little bit of a trap there where people forget all the years of investment they put in before they added the intensity.
Yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head for sure. Like, here's the thing. Like, in my own experience, I grew up as a sprinter. I swam from the age of 5 until I graduated from college, and I was just a sprinter, solely a sprinter. And yeah, we were in the pool all day long, or, for long hours, basically all year round, which equated to some aerobic base. But for me, I never had that big aerobic base. So CrossFit was an easy transition. And I lost the little bit of aerobic base that I had over the years of doing CrossFit. And I have a aerobic deficiency that I've worked years since 2013 on a regular basis to try to get rid of that deficiency and turn it back into a sufficiency at the very least. And those people that have that huge aerobic background, yes, they're going to experience better results because they can always go back and lean on that aerobic base that they built over the course of 20 years or 15 years or whatever. This newfound anaerobic uh, capacity that they're developing, yes, they're going to feel more well-rounded. But when you take an individual that doesn't have an aerobic base and you give them a program like CrossFit, yeah, they're going to develop this huge anaerobic base or capacity, but they've got no recovery ability because they have no aerobic base. And also, when they do have to do those longer efforts, they're going to wonder, why is this fitness not supporting what I'm doing right now? Right. So if they go on a long ruck, I can't think of a military example, but let's just say it's a
Rucking
ruck.
is always the
And
go-to. Everyone uses it.
yeah, okay. So you go on this long ruck, and let's just call it like a whatever 8 hour ruck, and you're just getting your ass beat by this weight on your back. If you don't have that aerobic base, you do this thing where you sprint, stop, sprint, stop, sprint, stop, sprint, stop, sprint, stop, and you just feel like a complete loser. And it's not that you don't have capacity, it's just you have the wrong capacity. And an example of that is back in 2014, they did that triple threes at the CrossFit Games, and everybody wondered why Rich was always walking. You know, he during the run he had to walk several times, and he was looking side to side like, I don't know what's happening. He would run real fast, stop and walk, run real fast, stop and walk. And the fact was he had an aerobic deficiency. And over the course of the next bunch of years, he turned that into, I mean, the guy's amazing, turned it into a strength. So it's just, it's one of those things. You just need to be aware of it.
I mean, I remember listening to a podcast he put out not too long ago where I think he was referencing you training him for the Leadville 100. So I think maybe you're the one setting the pace.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know about that. That dude, he's pretty inspiring. And honestly, I'm doing the Leadville this year again because of what I saw him do last year, honestly.
I love that you mentioned in there, you like, I think a couple of questions. Oh yeah, just like a mountain bike race. It's like, bro, that's like the Leadville. Can you just, what's the elevator pitch on that for people that don't know? Because I think most people hear that and think of the run, but there's also the bike.
Yeah. Honestly, to me, the run is like the more exceptional of the two, but the Leadville 100 mountain bike race is 100 miles. Starts in town at Leadville at about 10,200 feet of elevation. And over the course of 100 miles, you do, I think it's like 12,500 feet of climbing on the bike. So it's pretty considerable elevation profile. And the high point of the elevation that you reach is 12,700. So, I mean, we're talking sky high, double double miles up there, you know. And it's done anywhere. So the cutoff is 13 hours. You get a buckle if you do it under 12 hours,
A big
and you get a
buckle.
real big you
Yeah.
get a big belt buckle if you finish in under 9. And uh it's a pretty cool race. They call it the race across the sky, and it's because there's nothing higher in no higher mountain bike races in the country. And I did it once before, and I'm excited to do it again this year. So I've been training really hard. I'm actually wearing my bibs right now. It's because I was about to go ride, and I forgot we had this.
Did so that okay, that brings up a question that I think a lot of people are going to have. You mentioned the aerobic deficiency piece and obviously doing Leadville and now doing it again. Like you've clearly accounted for that. What did it look like for you? And you don't have to get super detailed with it, but just going from a high intensity, very anaerobic CrossFit type lifestyle now to much more of an aerobic lifestyle. What did that transition in training look like for you?
So to answer that, I would say that I'd first say that I still do a balanced program. So I try to hit a minimum of 2 aerobic workouts per week. And those are generally 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And right now I'm doing solely bike, but like as you guys know, like that looks like a run some days on our program. Other days it might be a mixed modality, low heart rate for 45 minutes to an hour, where it involves some cardio, some static holds, some, low intensity movements. But the other days of the workout, generally 2 aerobic days dedicated, generally 2 strength days dedicated, which would be like, right now we're working on back squat. I'm sorry, the deadlift and the bench press. And then generally 2 days of what I would consider CrossFit conditioning that is targeted at more zone 3 or zone 4 heart rate levels. And I do believe in CrossFit as a program to develop VO2 max and anaerobic capacity. So I absolutely still do it. But as I start to switch for more sport specific training, those start to fall away. So for right now, I'm 8 weeks out from the Leadville. I did a race last weekend. I have another race in 2 weeks, and then the Leadville's 8 weeks out. I'm primarily just doing bike work. That's it. Um, I'm doing a little bit of accessory work to maintain some muscle mass. Like today, I did all back stuff. Yesterday, I did the bench and the accessory work with the bench that's on the program. But outside of that, just biking. So it does look different.
Mhm.
And I think that, people often say things like, well, CrossFit trains you for everything. Well, it trains you well enough to be able to perform the 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 exercise or the event, but you won't succeed. You won't necessarily excel in whatever the event is unless it's CrossFit. It's a GPP program. It'll give you a base level of fitness, absolutely. But you got to switch to sports specific programming if you want to really do well at something.
So this is potentially a tangent, but I'm wondering what organizations or what people are the voice for or the influence behind introducing more of that aerobic stuff in your space? Because you used the phrase aerobic deficiency a few times, and for me, that takes me straight to like Scott Johnston, evoke endurance, uphill athlete training for the new alpinism, because that kind of stuff has had a lot of influence in military circles. I'm wondering
Yeah.
who like where is that coming from in the CrossFit space?
It's not. Obviously, they don't. It's off brand for them. They're not talking
Fair.
about that. Yeah, it's off brand. The definition of CrossFit is constantly varied functional movements at high intensity, not at low intensity.
I mean, it seems like the competitors in the space are getting it somewhere because it's like the competitors are consistently doing that
100%.
stuff. But
100%. Those dudes, you're not going to see a person on the podium that doesn't do 3 days a week of aerobic running. You're not going to see a person on 2 days a week minimum.
Or shirtless mountain
Uh,
biking. There's a lot of shirtless mountain biking I've noticed that's
yeah,
been going on.
shirtless mountain bike. Yeah. But honestly, you can go to Tia Claire, Matt Frazier, Rich Froning, Camila Blanc-Bazinet, uh, Jeffrey Adler. All of them follow Chris Hinshaw for their aerobic conditioning. 100%. You're not going to see other games athletes. And I'm not going to say names, but you guys can just picture body types that don't address aerobic conditioning on the podium. It's never going to happen.
Well, and I noticed that, I mean, this is now, I guess, going back several years. And I know we said we weren't going to talk a ton about competitive CrossFit, but I find it interesting because there was this kind of transition in the games where, I mean, I remember that first time at Camp Pendleton, they had that sort of triathlon. Like they've added an endurance component, it seems,
Yeah.
to account for that. But I guess at the end of the day, it's not as sexy on Instagram. Like, hey, I'm going for my run. Like people like watching snatches more, I guess.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And again, I think they all know that it's what's missing out of that program. It's off brand.
Mhm.
It doesn't mix with what people like about CrossFit. Like you said, it's boring.
Mm,
You remember when we sat down on a rower and rode
dude.
a freaking marathon?
Yeah, how was that?
Nobody
How was
wanted
that?
that. It was terrible.
Because here's what
It's
was funny
terrible.
about that. All the assholes that kind of I was around, sort of, civilian CrossFitters, so to speak. The next day after the games, it was like everybody was doing marathon rows. It's like, come on, man, do we have to?
Yeah. Yes, it's a long way.
Oh man. Okay, I want to get a take here because one of the things that certainly me, Alex, a little bit too, but National Strength Conditioning Association, certified strength and conditioning specialist, like that is the well, air quotes, gold standard for coaching in our industry.
Yeah.
Great, cool. I've maintained that the CrossFit level one actually prepares you better for coaching because you're in front of people. You learn movement patterns. You kind of learn the peripherals in terms of nutrition, et cetera. But you coach. You actually coach. And I know you're involved in all of that. So I'm just curious your opinion on the coaching education side of this. Like, what are your thoughts there?
So I'll have to be totally transparent. The NSCA stuff, the different CSCS and what is that? That's ACSM, right?
CSCS is NSCA. ACSM has some sports science stuff. NSCA has their own CPSS sports science now. There's a million certs out there.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna claim ignorance on that stuff outside of just
Totally
researching
fine.
it, the fire service.
Mhm.
Um, I am a Pure Fitness trainer, which is the fire services kind of version of that. And then all my other education is all CrossFit related. But that doesn't mean I don't or didn't and don't have my nose in books all the time about it. I personally think that the CrossFit level 1 is a good introduction to the methodology. Because of what you said, you get a chance to coach somebody. It gives you the opportunity to look at movement patterns. You have a demonstrator up on a stage with a very proficient lecturer communicating what's right and wrong about a movement, all of that stuff. The level 2 is really where it's at. That's a weekend of refining your eye to people who don't move well.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think that is one of the most valuable courses I've ever been to, which is somewhat limited, but I would say that if people are looking to add value to their resume as a coach, that CrossFit level 2 is pretty darn amazing. And frankly, prepping for the level 3, which is a didactic, basically a test, was also very beneficial. So I think the level 1, a lot needs to change for me to go back and ever to want to do it again.
Are you willing to talk about like what those changes might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was on the CrossFit advisory panel, or the level 1 advisory panel for a number of years, with the background of being in the fire service. So I was kind of like a representative from the fire service. And for years, we gave feedback that the time spent with the GHD lecture could be better utilized teaching people about the foundations of effective training. Like what an effective trainer, what traits that person has, as opposed to teaching them about a single piece of equipment that most gyms aren't going to have. There is a lot of working out in the level 1, which is great, but maybe that time could be better spent in those breakout groups where now we could have somebody else coach another individual and we could learn from that experience. The programming lecture is pretty great. The 3 different movement lectures that they do, the squats, deads, and the presses, all very good. They talk about how to balance intensity. That stuff's pretty good. But there's definitely spots in that thing where it's like we could definitely update some information.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that's so interesting because, like, we've talked about this a number of times, but my biggest gripe against a lot of and I'll throw CSCS out there as the one I'm kind of griping against the most, but maybe it's not a GHD, but it's an emphasis on sets, reps, exercises, and a de-emphasis, or maybe even just an ignorance of the human element piece. Maybe you call it psychology, maybe you call it, I don't know, biopsychosocial, like whatever buzzword. But in my opinion, not enough time is spent educating young coaches on the human element, what it's like to work with a human, how to be an effective coach, how to create a connection so that you can have buy-in, so they actually come back in the door. They seem so focused on, in your example, how to do a GHD sit-up, or, this is what Prilipin's chart says about strength.
But you know what? Along with that, though, they also do some of the stuff that they do, like the action of a muscle. That stuff like that is really interesting stuff.
Sure.
That isn't touched on at all in the CrossFit courses.
So you're saying they should add an element of that to the CrossFit course?
Not necessarily. What I am saying, though, is that you could look at each of these different courses that are offered from different organizations, and you could pick things that you like out of each of them. And really what it comes down to is, like, if you're using these courses as your primary source for information to become a better coach, the best results you're going to get is have a little bit of all of them. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
And I think, if like you said, the human element, the best way you're going to get that is get out and coach people. Because if you're just reading books, we've all been coached by people who just read books. And frankly, they're not great coaches.
Seriously.
So, well, first of all, I'll admit that I hadn't even heard of the peer fitness trainer cert. I Googled it after you mentioned it. It looks like it's an ACE cert in partnership with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. That's one
Pure?
I'll have to
Yep.
go learn about.
Pure?
It's peer. I thought it was pure
Oh,
when you said it, but
I thought you said pure fitness coach. That's kind of a cool name.
Sorry, Pierre.
you know, but and like I'll link that for people who want to check it out in the show notes and stuff like that. But this whole conversation about like how do you create a coach in X number of days is such a big thing in the tactical space. I mean, like a lot of fire departments use NSCA's TSAC, which is like a 1 week course, but really it's just a test you sit for. I taught the Army's 2 week course for a while. Some military organizations like CrossFit Level 1 is their course. There's a million different courses out there, and I think, like you said, the best way to learn is get out there and coach people. So there's tons of kind of pointless debate about what gets taught in some of those settings. But I think the only thing I really learned is that too much emphasis on the science too early is kind of pointless. Like I've seen classes where people come in, they've never touched a barbell before, they've never done like a structured track workout before, and like 20 minutes later, somebody's teaching them about Krebs cycle or sliding filament theory, or like
Right. Yeah.
and like there's this idea, and I think to a certain degree, it stems from like a historical disrespect for physical education as like an important part of education. But there's all these organizations want to believe they can manufacture quality coaches in a week or two and fix all the injury
Right.
problems or performance problems in their organization. And once again, I find myself not having a question at the end of this, just having kind of ranted for a couple minutes about
No, I agree with you. And it's the same with the peer fitness trainer course. I work with a bunch of guys. I'm the lead in the fitness committee where I work. And I think everybody that I work with, the majority of them, I'm sorry, within the peer fitness team, they would say, I'm not comfortable coaching people. They all have the certification, but they would readily admit I'm not comfortable coaching people. So what we do is we get them out into the academy where it's a bunch of kids that are fighting for a job basically, and they're not allowed to talk back to us anyway. So we're just gonna get out there and coach these guys and get it wrong, get it right. See what hits, what doesn't, and it's definitely the experience of coaching people is what makes you a better trainer, because you don't know what you don't know until you say something and you're like, wait a minute, what the hell does that even mean? Why did I'm telling him to do this, but actually that doesn't make any sense. I got to go look that up tonight, right?
Mhm.
And you start to flip through the books and start to figure it out. Shit, I have physics books upstairs because like I was trying to figure out all this moment arm stuff, and like
yeah,
I just
class one levers, class
I
two
don't
levers, class three levers. Yep.
yeah, you got to dive into the stuff when you realize you're saying something that you don't fully understand. It's like, well, I'm not going to let that slide. I don't I can't claim ignorance on something that I'm claiming to be an expert in. So I got to dig in a bit further.
Or
Well,
my favorite as a young CrossFit coach was like, okay, today we're doing squats, and there's always like an older, I don't want to say older woman, but whatever. I don't want to do it. Uh, okay. I guess don't. What else do you want me to do?
yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah, I will never forget those moments. Those are so much fun.
Yep. Had plenty of those.
So since you're talking about like the reality of peer fitness coaching in fire departments and things like that, I want to bring this back a little bit because some of the challenges that the firefighting community faces are surprisingly similar to challenges that the military community faces when it comes to health, fitness, wellness, things like that. And and you've talked about using CrossFit to train for firefighting and the fact that firefighting is inherently physical and things like that. But there's a bunch of research being done in the space, and at least in the United States, firefighters are more likely to be overweight and obese than the average American. So they work in a uniquely physically demanding field, but are by some measures less fit than an average person on the street. And then compound that with like the same thing in the military. People assume that the danger in the military is the enemy. And in some cases, that is the case. People get hurt and killed in combat. But just like soldiers, firefighters are more likely to die of cancer, heart disease, and suicide than they are in the line of duty at a fire. What, like, with fitness just being a piece of that overall like wellness and lifestyle thing, What do you think the way ahead looks like in firefighting? Or is that even a problem you can solve when they're already a firefighter? Does it have to be solved at a societal level?
Well, look at it like this. The way I think of that is you're absolutely right. 100%. Like the likelihoods of us dying in a fire are much, much lower than dying of a heart attack. 1,000%. But somebody who's fit is more likely to take care of themselves inside and outside the firehouse than somebody who is not. And unfortunately, the culture in the fire service is survival
Mhm.
right now. And we're trying to get by on these terrible uh, schedules that, yes, they buy you some time off, which is great. So, like, I work 48 hours and then I have 96 hours off. So I'm 2 on, 4 off. And during those 2 days, you're suffering and getting beat down with calls, with interruptions in sleep, with interruptions of meals, with high stress levels that are constantly being elevated and never actually returning to a baseline. But the payoff is that you go home and you have 4 days off. So people are willing to go and do that because of that payoff. But the problem is, you know, we're fighting an uphill battle. The minute you take sleep and you reduce your sleep, you're reducing your hormone levels down to a slow drip, right? That's why most firefighters are on, older firefighters especially are on testosterone replacement therapy,
Mhm.
is because they literally are secreting, that of like a, whatever, 25-year-old woman. Um, and the problem is that, with limited sleep and high stress levels, it's an instant equation for heart disease and heart attacks and all that stuff. So it's tough to say that like fitness is the answer because that's adding additional stress to the body. So like I think the answer is there's a there's a approach there's an approach that's like a longevity based approach, and it's taking all of these great uh theories and practices from people like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia and implementing a little bit of all of it. So maybe doing saunas, every day on your days off is going to help you live a longer and healthier lifestyle. Maybe not working out on your first day off, and practicing some mindfulness will reduce your cortisol levels back down to a standard baseline. Maybe not waking up early to go work out or to do some ruck or something like that first thing in the morning on your first day off, and instead sleeping 9 or 10 hours might get your testosterone serum in your uh, veins boosted a little bit. I mean, so to go back to your question, I don't know if fitness is the answer. It's just overall self-care is the answer to that.
With the
It's just fit people take care of themselves better.
Well, so, and forgive my ignorance, like you mentioned the 2 on, 4 off, and my question with that is, with a broad brush within firefighting, is that 4 off, that downtime, is that seen as like I'm still a firefighter. I'm not on the job in the sense that I'm going to get called to do something, but I do need to take care of myself. I do need to do the sauna, the sleep, all these different strategies. Or do you just see a lot of guys like, they leave the station and they just fuck off for 4 days? I ask that because
Yeah,
in the military, you do see like, I mean, sure, fitness a lot of times is seen as like punitive, but as soon as they're off duty, like the last thing that most people are thinking about doing is taking care of themselves. And so I'm just
yeah,
curious, like, what does that look like in your space?
man. I'll tell you, it's kind of like we break it into like the rule of 30s. You got the 30% of the guys that are fit and they're going to be fit, whether they're, hurting units or not.
Hmm.
They're going to still get it done. They're going to eat well. They're going to exercise. Then you got 30%. They're kind of half in, half out, and they could be dragged into a workout at the station. They could probably get into the gym maybe once or twice on the days off, but if something gets in the way, they're out. And then you got the 30% that has no interest in any of it.
Hmm.
So I think it's probably pretty similar to what you guys experience as well. Honestly, that's probably a pretty good statistic for most people, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I'll ramble for a second to provide context before I ask the next question, because I'm sure you have no awareness of what's going on with military human performance stuff right now. But one, like the whole premise of this podcast and platform and things like that is measures of performance versus measures of effectiveness. Measures of performance being, are we doing the things? And measures of effectiveness is, are those things actually working, right? You can do a lot of things without getting a lot of results. And what's going on across the Department of Defense right now and across other countries' militaries, that we're all dealing with the same problems, is we're introducing professionals to focus on all the things you described. There's sleep education stuff happening. There's recovery stuff. There's dietitians working on nutrition education and modernizing dining facilities. And there's mental health providers working on that piece of it. And there's specialists in all these domains getting involved and trying to tweak everything. But there's only so much you can add to somebody's job. Like they already have a job to
Yes,
do. And
totally.
sometimes the solution is not adding things, it's taking things away. Like if there's something getting in the way of somebody's fitness, you can't, or their health or their sleep or whatever it is. Like in my current role, shift work is a huge problem and job stress is a huge problem. I have people who are so stressed by just the job they are doing that their heart rate sits at like 100 at their desk. They're relatively fit people. Like if I take them away from their desk, their heart rate will drop to a normal resting heart rate. But just sitting there with all the stressors around them of their job, it's gonna hit them hard physically. And I can't solve that problem by adding something else for you to do. I have to figure out how
Right.
to take away the thing that's limiting you so much. And I don't know if we figured out how to do that yet. We know how to add professionals, we know how to add education, but I don't know if that's going to make the difference or not.
Well, yeah, and it's especially interesting like when you start putting into the equation like family,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I mentioned like taking extra time to sleep and try to recover, in the fire service, that's obviously a big focus is, trying to pay back the debt that you have, that your sleep debt that you have from being on shift. But um, you're now taking time away from your family that hasn't seen you for 48 hours and a wife that is been dealing with all the house shit while you're gone that certainly continues to happen. Um, and now it looks like you're sleeping in. So, there's all these things that like, unless you really communicate with your loved ones and come up with a strategy to deal with all this stuff, like, yeah, you're just going to dig this infinite hole that you're never going to get out of.
Hmm.
And, I think the military, it's obviously a little bit different problems, but absolutely like you have to bring stress levels back down. So adding more things to the table that are supposed to help you might not do that. It's maybe a different way of looking at it where it's like, okay, I'm not actually going to add anything, but what I do want you to do is take 1 hour out of your workday and literally go meditate. We'll take care of that, and hopefully that, helps. Like I'm taking something off your plate. You're not working for the next, let's just call it 30 minutes to go do some sauna, go sit in the sauna. But like you said, when you look at it in the paradigm of adding, people's plates are already so freaking full that there's just no room.
Hmm.
There's no room.
Do you guys have, so I've heard this sort of tangentially within firefighting because again, it's wrapped in that tactical bubble. But one thing you hear a lot is like, we can't implement a fitness culture or a PT test or whatever because of the unions or the pre-existing culture or leadership. And I'm just curious for a dialogue from you on that because a huge thing that the military is going through right now is that culture shift. And maybe the hierarchical nature of the military is a good thing or a bad thing in that conversation, but we're seeing a transition away from push-ups, sit-ups, running. And, hey, I show up to PT hungover, no big deal. I still crush it. Now there's a transition to sort of this tactical athlete paradigm. I mean, certainly the PT test has become more functional, so therefore the training has become more functional, yada yada yada. Is firefighting seeing something similar, or are you guys still just bogged
Oh,
down?
Yeah. No. People hide behind the union and don't face the music because of the protection of the union for sure.
Hmm.
Um, Luckily, I live in an area where most people are fairly fit. Even the unfit are generally pretty fit,
Hmm.
and you guys do too, obviously. The the thing about it is that um, I think I could be making a generalization here, but I think like it seems that Midwest is dealing with that problem more than the mountain states here are, from what I've seen.
Hmm.
But our union is pretty supportive of the changes that we have made. Uh, that's would be considered more of a fitness culture. They've been pretty supportive of it. Um, there is some there are some restrictions that you have to meet a certain standard or else you go on light duty.
Hmm.
So there have been changes now that I didn't think the union would be in favor of, but I think when you put it in terms of like, hey, this is life or death, and we all need to be on the same page with that. Like if you're not capable of performing the same amount of work that I am, then I've got to do your work for you on the fire ground. So I think everybody's pretty on board with it, and the union itself is supportive.
Hmm.
So I show up to all the union meetings and actively participate. So if they're there and they have questions about what the intentions are of some change that we're making, I tell them, hey, it's to make us safer
Hmm.
so that people aren't having heart attacks on the fire ground, and that their fitness supports the activities that are required of this job.
Hmm.
And they're like, fair enough.
That's a message I hope is getting out, whether it's firefighting, whether it's police, whether it's military, is like there's a lot of people who think that fitness testing is just there to like enforce a standard and it's annoying and I have to deal with it and all these things. But like it's there to keep people safe. It's there so you don't expose people who aren't prepared to stressors they're not ready for.
That's right. Yeah. We had an individual um, that ran into some extreme health complications due to our annual job performance test. And that test is basically a series of tasks that are all firefighting related. And the interesting part is it's not, you're not wearing, you are wearing an SCBA, but you're not on air. You don't actually wear bunker pants. You just wear a bunker jacket. So it's not exactly uh, the environment that you would be in an actual fire. There's no heat, for example, and uh, that could have happened on the fire
Hmm.
ground. And there could have been a crew of people with that individual that then would have been responsible for getting that person out of the environment that they were in. That could be hot, that could be a hoarder's house, that could be, heavily involved in fire. And now all those people are in danger. So I think having had that experience recently, um, at our fire department, I think really woke some people up and opened some eyes that this isn't just for the individual. This is for the crew.
Hmm.
So I know we're getting close to an hour and I heard already that we're standing between you and your ride, so I don't want to keep you too long. But
That's all right.
a fast one, because this is something I think about all the time in my current job. Everybody I work with, not everybody, but close to everybody I work with is on some kind of shift work for 24-hour operations for various different missions and things like that. And you mentioned 48 on, 96 off. That if we split that into shorter work days, that would be pretty similar to doing like 4 10s and 1 or 2 8s per week of like relatively normal shifts. And there's tons and tons of research on shift work and the consequences of it on people's health and performance and things like that. And the bottom line is you want to maintain as consistent a sleep schedule as you can. Sometimes that looks like anchor sleep. If you have to change schedules, try and have it overlap by a few hours, things like that. But there's a difference between what shifts are healthiest for people and what shifts people want for personal and family and fun reasons. How do you in the firefighting community try to like reconcile what's best for somebody's health versus what somebody wants to do?
Right, right. Well, we're kind of dealing with that problem right now. There's a lot of uh instigation of conversations where somebody from a different crew will rove into our station and they'll ask the question, what do you guys think about a shift change? Like swapping shifts, doing something a little bit different. And I think they're just poking the bear really, because everybody knows it's a fucking hot topic. But I mean, I do it honestly. Like I like asking people like, all right, hey, what do you guys think about a 24/72? They're like, well, wait a minute now. 24/72, how's that work out? We would need another shift. It's like, bingo, we would need another shift. But you'd go for 24 hours and you'd be off for 3 days and then come back. And they're like, oh, I kind of like that. I kind of like that. And the way that I look at it is it's like if you can sell the idea where people will at least consider it, to me, it then has traction and it'll have some motion, some momentum. Um, there's plenty of studies in the fire service right now that show what basically would equate to safety while on duty due to schedule, attributed to schedule. And they know which ones are safe and which ones aren't. What it comes down to is budget. So we don't really have an option anyway, unless our union pushed that to be an item. So, you get the way I look at it is you get people talking about it and you get them kind of like, hey, why don't you bring this up with your officers, see what they think about it too.
All right, so we're bumping up against an hour. There is one fast thing I wanted to ask before we let you go, and then Drew will hit some like rapid fire closers or whatever, the same ones we do a lot. But so I am like relatively recently getting into mountain biking. I like it because
You should do
despite
the
how
Leadville. Do the Leadville 100.
I'm probably not there yet,
Just do
but
it.
we'll get there eventually. I do live. I mean, I drove past Leadville a couple
Yeah,
weeks ago.
just do it.
And despite what people see on YouTube and things like that, most of mountain biking is pretty safe, or at least safer than road biking. There's no cars flying past me on single track. But you had kind of a somewhat terrifying accident, at least to me, because
Yeah.
you were on like pretty tame single track and had a what I don't know that I wasn't there. You were there. I'm going to ask you to tell us about it, but it seems like a relatively minor fall resulted in a relatively major injury just because of the way you got hit. I would love for you to talk through what happened and then how fitness contributed to your recovery.
Yeah. It was 4th of July, 2014, and Shree and I were on a mountain bike ride in kind of the neighborhood uh, single track area out near Boulder. And we were riding around and I kind of just slowed down and waited for her. I told her part of the deal of going riding that day was that we rode together. So I was a little bit in front of her. So I slowed down and waited for her. And while I was there, there's a log that was in the middle of the trail. And that's actually what kind of instigated me to stop and slow down. Was I was going to pop over it and wait for her, let her know that there was a log down. And as I popped over it, my chain ring got caught on it and I went over the handlebars. And as I did, because I was going so slow, the front wheel turned and I took the handlebar end right in my groin and it hit me like in my right thigh. And it hurt. All of my weight, I was balanced on the end of this bar and then I rolled off of it. And it hurt worse than anything I'd felt in a long time. And I basically pulled my shorts open and checked out the injury site, and it was already pooling blood under the skin. And it was no joke. This hematoma was like the size of a grapefruit within 2 minutes. And it continued to accumulate blood all the way down to my knee over the course of the next 10 minutes. So once we had decided that, this was a life-threatening injury and called 911, just kind of laid there, tried to make smart decisions. Shree had to kind of go off course and find some cell reception to even be able to call 911. But yeah, I was lucky to live. If I would have actually broken the skin, I wouldn't have, I don't think I would have lived because I severed the right branch of my femoral artery and got flown down to a hospital in Denver, and they repaired they didn't repair it. They tied off that artery. So I lost all that vasculature below it. And yeah, pretty wild. Pretty wild. I had 3 fasciotomies to let the blood flow, the swelling basically allow blood flow back to my lower leg and foot. Got a bunch of nerve damage because of it, but lucky to live, honestly. Let me just say this though. That was like not this is a somewhat common injury for mountain bikers. Uh, where I know it's scary as hell,
Right as
right?
you're about to go mountain
Uh,
biking.
Yeah.
yeah, but basically what you want to do is go over the handlebars, not into them.
Do you remind
That's
Sherry that if I hadn't been going that slow, I
Right.
would have, just saying.
Yep.
so just like weird, curious anatomy question following up on that. You're still doing lots of mountain biking, but you're missing a bunch of vasculature in one of your legs. Does that like impact performance today, or has that mostly taken care of
Well,
itself?
I'll tell you, I have knee problems and hip problems on that leg, and I haven't gotten a straight answer from any doctors that is what's causing it. But I do have that issue. I don't notice much of a decrease in capacity in that leg. When I measure my wattage, I can't pedal the same with my right leg, but I assume that that's because of my knee and my hip issues that I have. So I don't really know the answer to that. I think the doctors told me that all of those vessels would reinnervate the muscles over time. So
Is that why we do so many damn tib raises on this TrainFTW program?
it's to keep your knees
Yeah,
healthy.
every time we do that, I'm like, well, I know Matt had a pretty bad mountain biking accident. I wonder if that's why I'm sitting here doing these against the squat rack. So, okay,
Yep.
that helps. Thanks for that. All right, we'll get out of your hair, but I do want to ask you this one last question because I'm curious mostly. You've been doing fitness for a really long time. And I think, and maybe I know the answer before I even ask the question, but like, what gets you excited to go to the gym these days?
Hmm.
Maybe I don't know the answer.
You know, I've equated going into the gym to brushing my teeth.
Hmm.
I've built the habit. It was a pain in the ass for a long time, and now I just look at it as part of my day. Generally, I don't take days off just because I like knowing that I've done something good for myself that day, and I like how it makes me feel. I get a dopamine hit from it, and that's what puts me in the gym. I also know, which I'm guessing is what you're going to say, is that it's going to allow me to live longer and be capable of more. But in reality, I built a habit since I was a little kid that activity was part of my daily routine.
I always say I train to prevent having to deal with the anxiety of having not gone to the gym that day. So sounds about
Yeah,
right.
I buy that. I buy that.
Awesome. Well, we'll get out of your way. I know you've got your chamois on already, so you're gonna go mountain biking. But
Yeah.
thanks for taking the time to talk to us, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah,
Have a
Appreciate
good
thank
it.
you.
one. Bye.
So Drew, you're the Matt Chan fan. What'd you think?
They say never meet your heroes, but I'm glad I met Matt. Matt's a cool dude. Yeah, and I'll probably say some of this in the intro too, but I think Matt to me more than I don't want to say more than any other competitive CrossFitter that I know, but certainly he stands out at the forefront in terms of like a guy who has been in this space for a really long time. I mean, he mentioned in the episode when he was competing, he was in like his late 30s, which at the time was older, but still to this day crushing it physically. I mean, the Leadville 100 is not a small mountain bike race, and so hearing some of his perspective on how his training has evolved, how he's approaching fitness, what gets him excited to train, I hope people hear that and they take away like the sheer amount of carryover into the tactical space, because I for one heard a lot of that.
I'm a little bit surprised that those are the things you called out.
What was I
I was
supposed to call
expecting
out?
you to be more excited. I mean, some of the stuff, some of the one-liners, man.
Oh
80% of
well,
your
yeah.
training should be aerobic. The biggest issue with CrossFit methodology is lack of aerobic conditioning. He said the phrase aerobic deficiency like 3 times. That's like right up your alley.
It's like it feels like the dirty secret of like CrossFit. Like everybody knows it, but you can't. It's hard to make it sexy in such a way that you can throw it into a competition.
Well, we've talked about this. The secret sauce of CrossFit is not magically special programming. The secret sauce of CrossFit is getting people to care, and it's hard to get people to care about steady state cardio.
I thought the secret sauce was shaving your body hair so that you look shredded.
Maybe some of that too.
Maybe some of that. Yeah, but no, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, that was another reason why his story kind of appealed to me. And I mentioned this in the episode too, like him, Chris Spieler, a lot, Rich Froning, even to a certain extent. You see a lot of these dudes whose names most people know because they were the big names, I would say, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Transitioning away from, hey, we're going to do Fran 6 times a day, to now, I want to do this mountain bike race, or I want to do this triathlon, or I want to do this aerobic event, but maintain a lot of this strength. And that appeals to me. I mean, again, Google Matt Chan, like he's still very strong. He's still doing it in the gym, but he's also going and racing his mountain bike for 100 miles.
I was just excited that we didn't really plan for that conversation to have much discussion of aerobic capacity kind of stuff. But he kind of hit our own talking points for us. It's pretty cool.
Boom. Thanks, Matt.
All right.
See you next week. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in-depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.